This is part of the summer series of Saints and Sermons about women, by women, brought to you by the Cathedral of the Incarnation in Baltimore, Maryland. Our preacher is the Reverend Joanna White, Canon for Pastoral Services.
My friends, please sit down and relax. I've met a great many of you, and I'm actually a member of the Cathedral, like you never see me. But I'm Joanna White, and I serve the diocese as Canon for Pastoral Services, which means I work for you. I really try to keep up with what's going on in the Cathedral. I have an office back there. But I really do try. The most I can catch up usually is finding out what Chris Kaczynski is having for dinner on Facebook. But it's something, and I keep trying with that. I was utterly delighted to be invited today to speak as part of, a summer of women preaching and so on. But I am a particular fangirl of Florence Nightingale. When I was a child, I wanted to be a nurse. I never wanted to be anything but a nurse. And so I revered Florence Nightingale like some of my friends revered movie stars. And the other one that I loved to pieces was Clara Barton, the American nurse who served during the Civil War. But this was my ideal. And so I would try to learn things about her. But you know what it's like when you're a kid and you're reading these books, these biographies, and it's like reading the stories of the saints. They are so unattainable. They are just, they're written as if these are already otherworldly beings. And you want to be a little handmaid of the divine physician, but these things just seem to be way out there, and how can I ever do that? Well, I held that right in my mind until I was able to go to college. But here is where this all developed. Well, first of all, I have to tell you that was when I decided to become a nurse. Do you know what, in the 1950s, what you could do as a girl? You could be a teacher, a nurse, work in an office, or be a nun. Guess which one I cut out first. But those were the options. That's all you could do. When I went to college, I still wanted to be a nurse. And I still kept up with this image of Florence Nightingale. You see, Florence did not take no for an answer. She was born to a very wealthy family, a wealthy British family. She was born in 1820. And you know what option she had? None. She could be a wife. She could marry well. That was it. She could maybe learn needlework and music and how to set a table and throw a proper tea. And she wasn't anybody really within herself. She was only somebody in relation to a husband. Florence was having absolutely none of it. None of it. And I don't know, I still to this day don't know what that was that just fired her up. But somewhere along the line, Florence decided that it wasn't just people in her class, it wasn't just people with resources who deserved to be cared for. In the time she was growing up into adulthood, there were no real hospitals. They had some they called hospitals, but they were like warehouses for the dying. And you only went there when you have nobody else to take care of you. That was pretty much it. And as far as nursing was concerned, you know, we think of nursing with, you know, the college degrees and all of the work that you have to do, and to really be a scientist. What they called nurses in that day and age were like gin-swiggling women who couldn't find a job anyplace else. It was truly awful, absolutely awful. But Florence had heard some work that was going on in Germany, and she added her own sense of what was right, what made sense to her, and she developed the science and the art of nursing. Now, if you come right down to it, the things look like any 8-year-old that you know would say was reasonable. Keep the environment clean. Wash your patients' wounds. Feed them. Make sure they're hydrated. Wash the linens. Make sure there's linens. These were so basic, but nobody was doing it. It doesn't even seem possible. Now, not only did she know these basic things, but Florence had other ways of knowing and dealing. I can remember a number of years ago when I was moaning and whining over biostatistical analysis in graduate school. You know, why do I have to learn this? And somebody said to me, do you know how Florence Nightingale made a difference in medicine in England? She was able to prove to people statistically how much better the patient was when they took care of them. For instance, 18,000 wounds in war, only 2,000 of those wounds really were mortal wounds. The rest of them, people died of disease and hunger and dehydration. So she was able to prove this. Now, her family did not rise up and call her blessed when she decided to become a nurse. They were horrified. All of her social group was absolutely horrified. They wanted nothing to do with this type of thing. But she persisted. And isn't that something that we hear a lot lately? She persisted. And so the top brass of the army was nothing compared to her mother. She mowed right through them. And when the Crimea War started in 1853, she trained a group of nurses, went over there, and walked into these warehouses for the dying. And she was like a top sergeant. She moved personnel around. You clean this, you do that, you get that food, you get these supplies. She was hearing none of it when they said she couldn't do that. She was absolutely hearing none of it. But those hospitals did not turn into GBMC overnight. They did not. What was the difference there? Yes, maybe they got better food, maybe they got bandages. What was the difference? Here it was. Everything that was written on her included the viewpoint of the suffering patient who would say how she walked through those wards with a lamp. And they knew this woman who could have been anywhere in the world, this woman who could have been doing anything of a woman befitting her social class, opted to be among the suffering. And you know what saved them? It was hope. It was hope. That this person sacrificed her life to do what little she could, and believe me, it was little. What little she could. And she walked those wards at night. She walked those theaters of operation at night. And she gave hope. My friends, this is where we come in. This is where we come in. Not only did I become a nurse, when I decided to become an Episcopalian, this was the moment. I walked into the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in the city of New York. And over on the side was written Department of Social Services. Did they solve all the problems of the city of New York? No, they didn't. They couldn't. Did they give hope? They absolutely did. In this great cathedral, Department of Social Services, and that was instituted by Bishop Paul Moore. I wanted to know more about the faith that these people had. Tell me more about your faith. If this is what you do, I want to know more about what you believe about God. And so I became an Episcopalian. But in that process of study that I undertook to become a priest, I learned several things. One of them that I'd already learned a bit from becoming a nurse and even a mother is you can't change everything. You can't make everything better. Florence knew she couldn't make everything better. But she was present. I'll always remember the words of Alan Jones, one-time dean of Grace Cathedral, San Francisco, who said, "Don't just do something, stand there." You can't always do something, but you can be present, just like Florence. You can be present. And the other thing I learned that I felt was incredibly important, and it tied those various parts of my life together, was this. There's a wonderful icon by Robert Lentz of Mary Magdalene. And there's a meditation that goes with it, and the meditation says this: that afternoon on Calvary, Jesus was dying, and Mary could do nothing. She could do nothing for his suffering. What she could do was she could stand by his cross so that he didn't die alone. And suddenly, when I read that, everything came together. And one has to ask oneself, what cross am I willing to stand by? Whose cross is important enough for me to stand by? Think of the crosses Florence stood beside. You do what you can do until you can't do, and then you just stand there. Those things are important. It's vitally, vitally important that we get involved with outreach, not charity, not something out of the checkbook and out of sight, but to be heartfelt, involved in outreach, to be able to stand by somebody's cross and have them see in your eyes that you are there. And that's the hardest thing to do. But to be present, to hold up the light of our faith so that others can see, to hold up the light of our faith so that we can give hope to the world. Amen.